Today's Digital Humanities Colloquium series is by Maxi Gorynski on high-performance project management in the Digital Humanities. I think that's going to be very relevant for a lot of people. So Maxi is a digital humanist, a technologist, engineer, and essayist. And he spent 7 years in environments from enterprise firms working at world-class scale to tiny moonshot startups, in which performance is everything. Among other projects in technology and government, he is trying to distill the magic that underlies unusually high-performance organizations into a philosophy of management that any organization, anywhere, big or small, public or private, backed or bootstrapped, can use to radically improve the quality of their work, while just as dramatically improving the work lives of their employees. I think that sounds very, very useful. Let me stop the share here and I'll hand over the virtual floor to Maxi.
Thank you very, very much, Mano. And thank you, everybody, for turning up so early on Hump Day, nonetheless. I hope I'm going to make this very, very interesting for you. So before we get to the interesting stuff, can anybody who can't see my screen shout? Or anyone who can't hear me, for that matter? Okay, I'm going to presume everyone can hear me and see this. Good. Okay. So, high-performance project management industry perspectives for the digital humanities. I think Menno introduced it very, very well. Thank you very much for that, Menno. Just a quick word, I suppose, on myself. So, lovely to see you all. For those of you who I can actually see, I can mainly see your avatars, but that's fine for now. My name is Maxi. I am a digital humanist at heart and a DH graduate from King's College London back in 2016-17. I have had a very, very strange and unusual career in the pushing a decade since I graduated and got into the workforce. I think the description that Menno gave is probably the cleanest, reasonably accurate description of it as you can give. I have worked in very, very different kinds of contexts across all different kinds of companies, where, as Menno said, performance is absolutely everything. And I have been clued into some of the ways in which lots of the deepest and most interesting secrets of high performance and high performance management go basically unnoticed, obscured, or ignored, and the ways in which they're, in fact, and in many cases, considerably more straightforward to implement even than the things that don't work quite as well. And I'm hoping that I'm going to give you a very, very interesting picture of exactly what that looks like. Now, what you're going to see was assembled by myself and also by my former business partner and wife, Supriya Rai. Supriya can't be here today to talk about this with me. But rest assured, if I know anything about high performance management, she knows 2 or 3 times more, and her contributions to this have been absolutely essential. And you'll be getting the full benefit of that as we move forward through the presentation. I will make sure as well that the slides for today's presentation are shared with Menno, and Menno can share them with all of you. There will be some interesting goodies for you to comb over if you're interested in this subject. So, what the hell is high performance management? It's best if we foreground this with a couple of quotes that you can see on the screen at the minute. So one is from Charlie Munger, who you may know of as the recently deceased partner of the famous Oracle of Omaha, Warren Buffett, arguably the greatest value investor of all time. He was asked why Berkshire Hathaway, which is their company, was so much more successful a company than its peers, particularly in the matter of allocating capital, but also in management. He said, well, we're not prodigies, Warren and I. We can't play chess blindfolded or be concert pianists, but the results are prodigious. It's all about exploiting unrecognized simplicities. And unrecognized simplicities is a term I want you to bear in mind through every single slide of what we're about to discuss, because it illuminates absolutely everything that's important about what we're about to talk about. And the second quote is from a fellow called Butler Lampson. Damned if I know how he did it. It's just magic. Now, what he's talking about there is the culture of work that prevailed at a place called the Palo Alto Research Center, aka PARC or PARC, which was an offshoot of Xerox, the people who are best known nowadays for building laser printers. Xerox actually had the opportunity, not many people know this, to have been basically Microsoft and Apple combined in the overall development of computing and personal computing at an industrial scale, because they were the ones who founded and funded the research center, which was the Palo Alto Research Center, that basically developed all of the discrete components of the personal computer as we know it now. Unfortunately, they weren't visionary enough to see how this could be ported to market and mass adopted essentially for public use. So they only really benefited from laser printing. But the people who worked on developing those incredibly novel technologies, it was arguably the greatest assembly of computer scientists that the world has ever seen. And it was managed by a fellow called Bob Taylor, who was not actually a great computer scientist, although he was literate in that particular domain. And he had a particular management style that everyone there, including all of the people who were considerably better computer scientists than he were, accredit as being the reason why that project was so extraordinarily successful. So these are two people who know a lot about high-performance management. Now, in an academic context, which I think is really important to us being here and talking about this today, there are a lot of institutions that offer management courses of various different kinds. You can go to very, very elite institutions like the London School of Economics or University College London or various places in the States or in Europe and take committed and dedicated management courses. Now, most of these courses actually trap students in relatively suboptimal ways of thinking about how you manage complex systems. They are, if not entirely suboptimal, they at the very most train people to be able to manage at a level just a little bit above average. Now, in my opinion, the digital humanities could do something incredibly valuable, appealing, and actually rather revolutionary by opting to train students in principles of management that optimize for really, really high performance as opposed to a reliable standard of basically average performance. This means how you go about producing extreme results as a manager. As it says here, most management frameworks optimize for relative mediocrity. But if you look at incredibly successful, well-managed complex systems and their organization and how they were managed, like the development of the Great Western Railway in Britain in the 19th century, the organization of state capacity in Britain in a similar period, the Apollo program, the invention of the PC, as we mentioned earlier, you can actually optimize for a level of excellence that most people are not even aware exists, and they're certainly not aiming for. And it's also very, very useful when you are not necessarily in the blessed position of being a manager with considerable authority and you're working under suboptimal management. In short, a note on the origin story actually of this is that it came out of my repeated interactions with people who were really, really interested in figuring out how to use their digital humanities qualifications to their own greatest benefit out in the world of work. And they get approached relatively regularly by people asking, well, what can I learn? What can I prioritize that will be really, really useful to me in my professional life? And this was one of the things that I came up with that basically everyone can really benefit from. So let's dive into it. So students who know these skills will be able to get vastly more out of every project that they ever take charge of than anybody else. They will have a much stronger command of the conventional fallacies and pitfalls of regular management that they are absolutely going to encounter, even if they're the luckiest people in the world in their working life, because these things are so widespread. And high-performance management, as high-performance, the term itself suggests, it's a lot of fun. It's a really, really great vocational skill. It makes difficult things considerably easier, and it can even make things that might otherwise be relatively dull considerably more enjoyable. For the digital humanities as a discipline, there's a real incentive for this, and it's something that I am particularly keen to impress upon the faculty who I talk to about this. The thing that drew me to the digital humanities was the fact that it's interdisciplinary field, and high-performance management and management, generally speaking, is in my opinion, the ultimate interdisciplinary vocational science. You are bringing together a huge number of different skill sets, perspectives, vocational perspectives and philosophies into the service of a single goal. And you are also doing that in order to marshal the skills and the abilities of lots of different kinds of people in those sorts of directions. It's a huge bargaining chip with students that I think will be phenomenally useful in terms of increasing the catch-it of prospective students that the DH can attract, where you can basically make the pitch to people that, well, if you're interested in management, you can waste a tremendous amount of your money and go to pursue a regular management course. Well, not waste it, but certainly not get the full value out of the amount of investment that you're going to be making in terms of time and in terms of debt. Or you can come to hop on a DH course and you can learn how the most successful, innovative, and society-shaping projects ever staged were managed themselves, and you will not find that out in most other management modules. The extent to which we can guarantee as a discipline higher rates of postgraduate success, or post-graduation success, as I should say, really, that a module like this guarantees it's going to reflect phenomenal credit and acclaim upon the departments that practice it, and draw a lot more very well-merited and well-deserved attention towards the DH as a discipline. So let's actually dig into the basics, what high performance means. Deep subject matter knowledge, systems thinking, skills and training obsession, combining responsibility with authority over micromanagement and decentralized control. First and foremost, deep subject matter knowledge. So if you look at the common characteristics of great managers, they tend to be what is referred to, I believe, in Japan as gray collars. So this is people who can zoom out and work and conceive of things, missions and projects in a very strategic sense, but they also have an intimate knowledge of the shop floor and the figurative or literal machinery that is there down upon the shop floor, how it works and how the people there who are responsible for it deal with it. You can see this markedly in a contrast of the fortunes between Japanese and British heavy manufacturing concerns in the 20th century. In Japan, you had managers who were always also individual contributors. They worked on the factory floor. They had an intimate sort of fingertip grasp and command of exactly what their employees were having to deal with on a daily basis, the requirements being levied against them or being levied to them, and the challenges that they encountered. And this produced not only a tremendous culture of productivity, but a really legendary quality control as well. And almost certainly considerably less by way of the kinds of micromanagement and disruptive micromanagement that can make any kind of work a chore, although we'll get to that a little bit later down the line in our discussion. In Britain, on the other hand, in the same period, even though Britain had accorded to some of those similar principles beforehand when it was most successful as an industrial force, by the 20th century, managers had sort of ceased to take the floor. They didn't really have a tremendous understanding of the general workflow or how to really grasp and improve the processes within it, which led to lower productivity and lesser quality control. Number two, systems thinking. So the real hallmark of managers who perform at a very, very high level is that they very rarely, if ever, think of problems in isolation. They think of them in either abstract terms, or use a rather different example here. I don't know if any of you are German history buffs or military history buffs. You'll have heard of Helmut Moltke Sr. if you are. Prussian commander of the military, who realized that the key to victory in 19th century war ceased to be pure battlefield logistics, but was in fact his ability to properly leverage railways to transport troops and material considerably longer distances in considerably shorter a time. It's a brilliant leap of thought, even if you prefer your high-performance management to be of a considerably more pacifistic bent. I know I certainly do, but these are very, very good examples nonetheless. But they also think not only in abstract terms of problems, they think of problems in ensemble terms. And a very good example of this is Apple. They determined that it was obviously very, very well known that their secret source was the understanding that great computing was in a fully integrated widget as opposed to a very, very widely distributed manufacturing culture with lots of different companies building different components that only had a partial compatibility with each other. And they also combined that with a single company-wide profit and loss principle, so that you didn't have separate departments competing to make marginal improvements to individual components in a way that ultimately served to the detriment of the end product. And it's one of the reasons that their own quality and delivery quality control is also so high. Now, this is the thing that I think most excites me about high-performance management, is that the real underlying factor in success is the degree to which you focus on skills and training of the people that you're actually managing. So a great manager, even if they're very, very skillful as a manager or as an individual contributor, they only have one pair of hands and they never have enough time. Which any of you have managed anything, you will know this. Oh, you'll know this very well. What that means is that skill capital really comes at a premium in the way that we manage things. If you can spread higher skill capital among the people that you're working with, the amount of really, really good work that you can do compounds dramatically. And any manager that aims at getting a higher than average level of performance, right up to the level of high performance out of the team, will focus probably up to half their time on broadening and deepening their team members' individual skill sets. And there's a really, really profound dimension to this that we mustn't lose sight of in these instances, because yes, on the one hand, high performance is great for organizational outcomes, it's great for productivity, it's great for building loads of really cool stuff in short time frames and without having to spend extraordinary amounts of money on it. But one of the really, really great things about this, and the thing that I've seen that I think is most fulfilling for me as you implement this, is the effect that it has on the people that are actually working underneath you. Because most people, and I'm sure we've all been in this position ourselves, what most people who are working on a project really long for, aside from the conventional satisfactions and the material incentives of working on something, is that they want to feel that they're being invested in. They want to be able to look forward and say to themselves with confidence that, well, if I work hard on this project, in a year's time, I'm going to know things, I'm going to be able to do things, and I will be developing and growing in ways that in some cases I might not even be able to imagine this year. And that really, really excites people. And that's the sort of thing that makes people kind of skip on their way to work, as opposed to, looking forward to the week's responsibilities with dread. And it's one of the really important things about this is there's a really strong human development dimension to it that I think we must pay strong attention to always. Additional basic for high performance, the combination of responsibility and authority. Most standard management defaults to micromanagement, managers who meddle with their subordinates. Project scopes usually not very well conceived. They get changed arbitrarily, which generates a lot of waste, a lot of expense, a lot of stress, a lot of tension. A lot of complex frameworks are used to make what would otherwise be very, very simple tasks incredibly complex, often to make the manager look better, as opposed to making the overall process work more effectively. It's a low trust system. High performance management is the essence of high trust. It's about giving teams the responsibility and authority to achieve their objectives, having equipped them with the skill and the know-how that's necessary to do that. And it encourages both high engagement, much improved standard work, and it allows you to really harness all of the knowledge and creativity that's latent in your team, which again is the essence of fulfilling work from the perspective of creating a culture where that is the norm. I'm just going to kind of skip over this at the minute because I've already gone on for longer than I meant to for the entire presentation. We still got a couple of slides left, so I will leave you to read this one when you get the slides a little bit later. So decentralized control is another basic ingredient. Once you have a team who are equipped with the knowledge they need, who are trained, who have clear objectives, then your job is to get out of the way. It's high-performance management, high-performance manager. Most of your responsibilities lie in key preparative steps. Thereafter, your job is to let your team do their thing. You may be called in from one moment to the next to drive them on, encourage them, help them strategize ways to move roadblocks that they've encountered. If there is a really serious error correction that needs to be made, you will, needless to say, be called upon. But the hallmark of your success, if you've done everything else really well as a high-performance manager, is you don't really have that much of a need to interfere. The team is well-trained, they're well-equipped, they understand the limits and the remit of the challenge that they're facing. And aside from inspiring them where you need to, that's basically most of your job already done. Again, I'm going to skip both mine and Supriya's stories, I think, mainly from the front on this, just on account of the fact that we're already spoken for about 20 minutes, and I was only supposed to speak for about 10. But as I say, I will share these slides with you. You can dig into some of these things. There are lots of other resources as well that you will see here in the bibliography if you're interested in this space. The concluding remark really on the thesis, and hopefully you will have noticed these things anyway, but if not, this will, I hope, kind of identify these things more clearly for you, is that there's really not very much that's complicated about this. I've not had to kind of dress this up in 100,000 gorgeous data visualizations, although there's obviously a lot of data out there, especially in the material and the bibliography to vouch for this stuff. It's not about complex frameworks, and it's not really about extraordinarily sophisticated schemes for productivity, although in some cases those things can be helpful. It is really, really a very easy to understand set of principles. And the fact of it being simple is very much an intentional thing, because this is about making things that are otherwise complex, breaking them down into their simpler components and making those individual components considerably easier for people to address in a very decentralized way. And also the thing that I expect you might have noticed, unless you were very, very lucky, and if you are one of these very lucky people, I want to talk to you because you probably know more about this than I do, is that hardly anyone manages like this. Very, very seldom do I encounter people who have been privileged to be managed under these sorts of auspices more than once in their career. And they almost always, when they talk about the one time they were managed in that way, talk about it in the most glowing terms, that it was the most interesting work and the most fulfilling circumstances for doing that work that they've encountered in their career. And even if you're not necessarily doing something of a magnitude of inventing the personal computer or going to the moon or modernizing a nation state, which is what this stuff has been used for in the past, you will certainly feel like you were doing something very, very worthwhile. if you are working in a team context that does things this way. It's kind of a spooky level of commonality in terms of the way people react to it. So I think we should be putting this power in the hands of our departments and in the hands of our students. As I said at the head of the presentation, lots and lots of alumni who talk to me about how they can best leverage their skills that they learn at DH. They want to know what they have that's most valuable. And the great thing about this particular skill is it's not only valuable in and of itself, it's one of the ways that you make everything else that we teach them even more valuable. It could be deployed better, could be the knowledge can be passed on, can really, really be made to count in a really big way in a project, in an organizational context. And it could be one of the most, if not the most high impact individual skill that we ever teach them. And if you're interested in figuring out how to get this into curricula and study plans, so am I. Really trying to get that off the ground. Anyone who's interested about it outside of the remit of this call, I'm presuming that I haven't been able to see the chat, so you may all have been throwing in the chat with messages about how absolutely nuts this is. Hopefully not. All of you who are interested in this beyond the scope of this call, please get in touch and we can get to work. Right, I'm going to shut up now and I'm going to look at the chat and get to answering some questions.
Great, thank you, Maxi. I see the chat's, it's still pretty empty, but I see Tanya just raised a hand. Tanya?
Let me quickly unmute myself. Hello, good morning. Thank you for a very interesting talk. I think I would have loved to be managed like this at some stage in my career. Now I'm more on the other side, that I am managing people. And one thing that sort of came up as a question from my side, I mean, I can see the benefits of what you've been explaining. And I mean, I'm definitely not a micromanager, but sometimes it does slip in, even if you don't want to. But one thing that I sometimes have struggled with in the past is the unwillingness of people to change. So, like, you know, you're trying your level best to. I mean, this is introducing a change, right? If you're going to manage people in this way. Sure. And my question to you is, how do you deal with, you know, people who just won't be moved or don't want to change or don't even want to give a chance to something that is different or new because, you know, they've always done it in a certain way and now they have to change and they don't like it? Yeah,
it's a really great question. It's actually something that is, I think, probably worth adding to these materials on account of the fact that in many cases, as you're alluding to, as you might try and implement these things, you will get pushback. And if you don't get you can get pushback from team members, or you can get pushback from people higher up the chain who are kind of disturbed at the level of kind of liberality in some cases that's given in these situations. There is a potential hard limit on this that one does have to acknowledge, which is that you may well find yourself, if you're unfortunate enough to find yourself in a context where you're managing people who naturally have particularly low levels of motivation or dispositionally are not inclined to want to take responsibility for things, you may find that the ability to implement these kinds of things is more on the limited side, and you have to do more by way of kind of pushing and prodding. And as you say, I mean, sometimes you find yourself in positions of relative micromanagement, even without any desire whatsoever to do so. I think the fortunate thing about that, from a kind of, as much as anything else, I guess, from an anthropological point of view, is that generally speaking, and in an absolute likelihood sense, most people are not like that. I think most people, and it's as much a dispositional thing as it is a raw ability thing. I think most people respond positively to the idea of being invested in, the idea of being encouraged in that way, given responsibility and some authority. And I've been in situations before where I've had team members who have been absolutely desperate to take up these kinds of principles in the context of a team where there are also other members who really were not that interested in taking up what they thought was the kind of hassle of having to do more sort of thinking for themselves and do more training and things like that. And the thing that I found that was really useful was that if I managed to spotlight what the more naturally conscientious members of the team were doing, you create a very kind of benign social pressure on the people who are maybe less inclined towards that, where they go, well, the people who are embracing this seem to be having a better time. They're getting more done. They are, you know, doing more things that are coming in for praise for, you know, among other people in the organization. And, you know, promotion cycles are coming up. There's probably an incentive here for me to try and get on board with this. It's really it's a cultural thing, absolutely, and cultural norms and customs are things that you absolutely have to negotiate when you're trying to put something like this in place. And I think the key, unless you're very, very unlucky and you just have a team that's not particularly responsive to these kinds of things, you will probably have at least a few people who are absolutely desperate to try and work this way. And if you can really, really put the spotlight on them and very, kind of delicately nudge the people who are a little bit more reluctant, and to, to tailor the approach as well in some cases, because you might have people who, they're reluctant on account of the fact that they're being trained in an area where they're not sure that they can make the leap to where you need them to get to. If you can shepherd them through that and encourage them and support them, over a period of time, you can bring about that shift to something that's considerably more high output and that has that kind of freer, more sort of creative context for people to work. But absolutely, yeah, you're absolutely right. It's not something that absolutely everyone will leap at. But if you can get that kind of that initial purchase, then
yeah, okay, thanks. That does align with kind of what I was expecting. Can I just quickly ask a follow-up question? So you said, you obviously need to invest in people, so you need to spend time for them to get accustomed to what you want to do and your new ideas. What is your experience like? How much time does it usually take for a team to kind of embrace the new way of working and for free to really take hold and become something that's sort of more natural and ingrained in a team?
Yeah. So it's really a question of what kind of skill platform you're working with to begin with. Sort of, what kind of organization this is, what skills the people already have, what their experience profile is, how much of a departure you're asking for them to make in terms of, right, we're here at this point, we're trying to get to this next stage. If it's a natural one-step progression, then you're probably looking at something that's considerably shorter. And I think so if I give you an example, I was working at a very, very conventional sort of old school pharma consultancy company, and they basically brought me in to turn them into more of a technology company. And I was working with a group of, there was a team in India, and they were, I think, generally all under 30 years old, very bright, very motivated. They had some technical skills, but the thing that I really wanted the team to start being able to do is working in code and dashboards, as opposed to being working in Excel and the front ends of not very sturdy pieces of existing software, so that we could do a lot more sort of custom work. Because they had an existing technical education, and because I was very fortunate, they all had absolutely amazing appetites for learning and to kind of move things forward. We managed to get into a position where I was leading them to sort of spin up proof of concepts and things within a month or 2 months of the initiative starting, which was really useful because it meant it was easier to get buy-in up the organizational chain, because you could go to them and say, well, instead of you having to, cope with reduced output from this team for 6 months while everyone trains and does basically little else but training, it was very, very easy to get them right. Well, we're going to train in the context of projects that are going to then be useful to the company's activities. And that made it an awful lot easier. And it's something that I would encourage, generally speaking, is to the extent that it's possible. And realistically, I think probably if it's not possible, it's probably you want to get certain other things in place before you then want to make a shift to a high performance culture. You want to synchronize moving to that new management culture with something that's only a kind of one step change in terms of skill capital. So if people are working as data analysts before, but you then want to do something that's more software oriented, that's probably achievable, because those people will probably have some of the basic technical competencies to start building the other stuff. And then if you can be very, very progressive in the way that you manage that, in terms of, right, well, we have a larger project here, we're going to try and manage the transition through some smaller things that allow people to see how the management approach works, and also so that people can pick up their new skill capital in a way that makes them feel really confident in these new abilities that they're developing. That's when it becomes smoothest and easiest. And also it has a kind of naturally compounding momentum to it, because people, they kind of can get into the mix with their new skills. They start to build comfort with them really easily. They are exhilarated by the fact that they can, oh my God, I can do this stuff that I couldn't do 3 months ago. And then it kind of builds naturally from there. It's very, very good, as I say, for organizational buy-in, which is a big consideration for this. Does that make sense?
Oh, definitely. Yes. Yeah. Now, I was just wondering, so I think what I'm hearing is basically take it slow, but not too slow, and make sure the leap is not too big for, the people involved, because that puts people off, obviously, because you don't see results as quickly as you'd like to. And I mean, we're living in a society where everything has to be faster and quicker, and you have to achieve something overnight. So I guess, yeah, we have to make sure that the buy-in is there quickly and people see benefits in what we try and do. But yeah, thank you for elaborating.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I think actually just one last addendum to that is that often this kind of approach actually kind of makes things go faster naturally, as opposed to going faster in a contrived sense. I think, with skill cycles, that there's really no point going any faster than people can realistically keep up with, because you want them to build skills that they can really use, as opposed to things where it's just something that's put on a piece of paper or on a spreadsheet or on a presentation at the end of a quarter to say, I did this. But that's the great thing about this, is that it kind of, people start moving faster and with sort of higher quality in the movement just naturally as you get this sort of thing together. So yeah, it's great. Thank you for the questions. Very good questions. 2 questions from the comments. Where to enroll? How long? How much? What's the cost of the course? Is it online or is it a contact face-to-face course? So I am planning this at the minute. The one definitive answer I can give to that is that I expect to be an online course. Unfortunately, I don't know if all of you guys are in South Africa. I'm in London. I would have loved to have come to South Africa for this. It wouldn't have quite worked from a scheduling point of view, but I would have really enjoyed it. I've never been to South Africa before. I expect fully that certainly for the short course, it's going to be online. All of you who are interested in this, I will just leave my email address in the chat. It's in the presentation as well. I'm sure Menon will forward that to you, but just so you can have it to hand. Please just email me just briefly a word on yourselves, your kind of obviously professional backgrounds. I guess most of you are going to be professors or something equivalent, and what you want to get out of something like this, because at the minute I'm really building these materials to serve as best as I possibly can the people who are interested in learning this. So if you give me that information, I can start to develop things that are tailored to what you need. So yeah, please do send things across.
Thanks. So if you have that information at some point and where it practically starts, we can also kind of distribute the information through our channels so that people can actually, I mean, looking at the questions in the chat, it looks like there are people interested. I know there are people I'm interested as well. So I think it would be nice if we can get like a nice cohort of people to do this, because at the same time, I think it is new for this whole idea is new for a lot of people. So it's also nice if you just do a particular training and then you're kind of thrown in on the deep end. You might be struggling, you might find issues that you didn't really think of before. And it's so nice if you know a few other people as well that you can talk to that are kind of in the same environment. I mean, the countries are different, people in countries are different.
Absolutely.
So knowing a few people that have the same idea, yeah, that might be interesting as well. Benito, you have a hand up?
Yes, thanks, Menno, and thanks, Maxi. I actually listened to this last year. I don't know which conference was it. So thank you. I actually picked up a few. So I'm reading a book now called Moral Ambition. And for me, it makes, what you said today links to, okay, I don't think this quote is from the book, but it links to that also, that confidence is not, it's not this natural thing, from perception, we think some people just have confidence to do things and confidence to, not be managed and to make other people's lives easier. But, this whole thing of confidence comes through action. And also, you can have all the idealists in the world, but if nobody is doing something, then nothing is going to happen. So, yeah, I just wanted to comment that people who are naturally inclined to be more reserved, or if you're in an environment where you don't feel you can make mistakes, I think that influences people's the uptake of, you can really do anything. Nothing is as important as you might think. And I know my colleagues know me by another stolen quote I have of saying, as academics, we are saving PDFs, not lives. So, ultimately, there's a way to experiment and say, okay, that didn't work. We might have lost a bit of money and maybe a bit more time, but you grow through doing these things.
Yeah, I think it's very similar to the point that Tanya raised. I think this actually merits being having a very, very strong place in the course materials that are going to result out of this as we move forward, because it is absolutely something that has a transformative effect on that kind of disposition of confidence in the way that you approach your work. Because in many respects, high performance management is about giving people the kinds of I wouldn't even necessarily call it a net, but the kind of scaffolding to be able to take certain kinds of chances that they might not feel emboldened to otherwise, and also de-risking a lot of the de-risking the act of doing so, because a lot of the things that end up being profound breakthroughs come through taking shots that frankly not everyone might have the confidence to take, and in some cases you take them and because you didn't quite get the aim right, it doesn't go as planned, or in some cases you might just have been barking up the wrong tree to begin with. But the great thing about this way of approaching things is that you are not only, because you can move so much faster, and you can, again, not in a contrived sense, but in a natural sense, move faster. And because you're moving with much less waste, it means that there is considerably less of a risk to making certain kinds of mistakes. And also culturally, this is the kind of management philosophy where you're encouraged to try and take those shots, because you've been equipped with all the knowledge that you need to be able to calculate the risk of what you're doing. And because I think temperamentally speaking, the kind of person who's really going to be drawn by this kind of thesis is going to be the kind of person who has a lot of respect for people who are willing to push boats out and to try things that haven't been done before, and trying things that haven't been done before in the most de-risk possible circumstances. Exactly how we stumble upon things that improve, lives and methods of work and outputs for absolutely everyone. So yeah, I think it's really important what you just said in terms of the overall, the culture of this, as opposed to just the specifics of how you actually practice it. And thank you, and good to see you again. I've noticed you come up. I was very gratified to see. I think you and Mano may well be the first to return, or aside from Giles, the Nelson Mandela as well, who was the first one.
But it's not, and yeah, I just want to then link exactly, what you mentioned at the beginning about magic. I think people sometimes they want a way to justify, if they do this, it will lead to this, and it's also a way of, I want to say, having that tradition of, if you followed the steps and it didn't work, you can fall back on that when you have to report what happened.
Precisely.
While, if by happenstance something happens and it's nice and, and you can't explain it, I think having that freedom to say, okay, I tried something, I don't know how this was the outcome, but, it's just, I'm grateful it had a positive outcome. It wasn't intended, but, that's what made it great. This uncharted path that, you were basically sent on to say, no, but try, really. This will show you a way of doing something. But yes, so thank you.
Big time. Thank you. Absolutely agreed.
So wonderful. I saw in the chat, but you already replied to that. There was a request for the bibliography. You didn't share that, but you shared the entire slides,
yes,
which includes the the bibliography. So that's all good. Thanks for that. I'm not sure if there are any other questions. While people are thinking of their questions, I actually had a question as well.
yes.
So at some point you started talking about teams, right? So as a manager, you have certain teams that are kind of working, doing their magic. And I was wondering what these teams should look like. Is it just a bunch of people who are just kind of what's the word? Kind of work among each other, identify the roles within the team themselves, or should it have perhaps a semi-hierarchical structure? And if it is more of a hierarchical structure, is it necessary to have like this managing style within a team, or how does that work?
So the specifics of what roles you're going to find staffed in these kinds of contexts is entirely kind of contextually dependent. So it's going to be very, very different if you are leading a quality control heavy engineering team as opposed to you're managing a team that's trying to build a consumer software app, or if you are trying to lead a team in a military logistical context versus you're trying to build the best retail floor team that your store, your department store has ever seen. So the actual specific roles are really defined primarily by context. It's a little bit different from something like, for instance, the Scrum framework. And this is kind of one of the things that this is defined, not in opposition to, but I think certainly in some degree of contrast to, where you have these kinds of roles that sit above the specific functional role that someone has. And that's kind of, it's a means of regulating both, distributing responsibility and all those kinds of things. A big part of, in my opinion, the sell of high performance approach is that you don't really need to figure that kind of thing out. It's more or less a case that you have the team lead, who is also to some extent an independent contributor, an individual contributor. The remainder, it may well be the case in any of those given contexts that there may be natural, there will be natural hierarchical positions that then need to be filled to then be managed in a high performance context. So if you're managing a factory floor, then you may have a general manager, and then you may have a foreman who has considerably more sort of operational responsibility or logistical oversight responsibilities than the general manager, and you can fill those kinds of things. But there aren't really very many hard and fast requirements, and you can very, very easily run this as a relatively flat hierarchy where you have a team lead who, again, is more in charge of ensuring that skill capital is properly distributed, that mission and task clarity is optimal, that roadblocks are suitably cleared, that material is properly resourced for the team, and all those sorts of things. And then the rest of it is relatively, the responsibility is distributed otherwise just according to function, as opposed to there being long chains of seniority. It's one of the things that makes this so usable, is the fact that instead of then having to have procedure that you then have to spend a lot of time servicing, or where, for instance, you might have more complex interactions of existing seniority, where, say, for example, you have a structure that already has, you might have a head of department, and then you might have a vice president, and then you might have a head of X and then a head of Y working under those sorts of things. Not having to then fit those people into other existing frameworks can be a much, much easier sell, because people don't have to worry about, okay, well, is my title going to change, or is my standing in my wider department going to change? It's a lot softer on those sorts of things. As long as you can agree on who the basic point is for the core leadership, everything else can more or less be functional. And I would think that the success of this, in terms of it being so widely practicable, should kind of maintain that as much as possible. I think there are other ways of doing it that can be effective in a given locale, but as I say, the whole thesis here is to try and remove as much as possible of the additional kind of ornaments of management convention that in some cases don't work very much more than just allowing the manager to look like they're more impressive and sort of getting things out of the way for the real functional stuff to be done. So you can keep it very simple, and that's the point.
Okay, no, that makes sense. Thanks for that. I see there is another question. Kanyisa, do you want to unmute and explain?
I was just asking, when you work on a digital humanities project, you have these blocks where you have to stop because there's some resistance of some sort, and then you continue again by repairing whatever that was. But for my project, specifically working with less than 4 people. There's 4 of us. So I'm just wondering, if the number of people determine how successful, or how, how successful the system is.
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. So the answer to that is that it's, generally speaking, teams that are relatively small, very motivated, very well trained, and have fairly strong existing relationships of one kind or another, they tend to be the most effective. However, of course, there is a tremendous amount of scope to apply what we're talking about to much, much larger organizations as well. And so the best way of approaching that in terms of making the whole thing scale is that you want to separate the dimensions of a different larger undertaking, project, whatever you want to call it, into different functional areas. And depending on how many functional areas you end up with, you want separate teams that are going to apply these sorts of principles in their specific context. So say, for instance, instead of having a large team of 26 people who are going to be working, I'm going to use software just on account of the fact that it's where a lot of my experience is, so it's easy for me to sort of pull better examples. If you're working on a project which you expect is going to last between 6 to 9 months or a year, and you expect that you're going to have maybe 30 people involved in total, and there are different functional areas, because some people are going to be working on the user interface, and some people are going to be working on data pipelines, and some people are going to be working on infrastructure and architecture and things like that. And what you want ideally is you want each of those different departments to have their own kind of high-performance style team to administer to their individual task areas, so that you would have, and this actually kind of, I think, speaks maybe as well to what you were talking about, Menno, in respect of hierarchies in different contexts, is that you will have one person who is primarily responsible for the overall delivery, and they will then designate people further down in the layer. Again, very much similar to themselves. They need to be people who can contribute themselves, but who have a flair for being able to motivate and organize people. And they're then responsible for making sure that the process works at those kinds of smaller layers. But the way that it works at the smaller layers is a model of how it works at the larger layer. From the primary manager's perspective, they're going to be mainly liaising with their team, who is composed of the other managers. And then the other managers individually will have their own individual contributors in their teams. And they all manage the groups of people for whom they're responsible in basically the same way. Generally speaking, I think for any kind of task where you're trying to have the most fun and do the most interesting stuff with the least delay and the least wastage, trying to make the operating unit smaller is generally better. It just means that there's fewer coordination problems. You're forced to figure out what you want to do and what you need to do much earlier in the process, which means that you don't fool yourself into thinking you know what you want to do, and then 4 months down the line you realize you have to scrap everything you've done. It's a nightmare. So yeah, that's the best way to do it. Smaller teams in functional areas, managed then by someone who has more sort of central responsibilities. Does that make sense? Is that clear?
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Great. You're welcome. Yes, Tanya.
Just a follow-up question on that. So before you also said that, you can have kind of a flat hierarchy if you'd like. Now I'm curious, if you combine flat hierarchy with small team, how should I so the question that's sort of rising in my mind is, right, so the whole style of managing leans on making people self-sufficient, right, to a certain degree. But what's going to happen if you have this flat hierarchy, you have a small team, and then everybody's self-sufficient? How do you keep the team as a team? How is it not going to be islands of people just doing their thing, and then, at the end of the day, maybe something's going to come out of the project, but maybe it's also just islands drifting apart?
Yes. Super question. These are all absolutely fantastic questions. Thank you, everyone who's asked them. That's another one. It is a possibility in a given circumstance. The way that you ward against that is by having very, very clear. So when we were talking about responsibility and authority before being centralized in the same people, both things being given to the same person for a given task. This is really where you can get some measure of a guarantee that the kind of thing that you're talking about doesn't happen, because what you want is at the start of the process is you want to have very, very clear articulations of who is going to be responsible for what, who's responsible for delivering what time the thing that they're working on needs to be delivered, what resources they're going to have. Because if you don't lay these things out preliminarily, it's basically impossible to understand whether the person who's being tasked with this actually has any chance of realistically being able to achieve it, right? So it's another one of those instances where having a very, very clear-eyed understanding of what you want to do to begin with. And again, it's not necessarily even the fact that this can't change or can't adjust relative to, you know, for instance, if you're doing something where there's a lot of feedback from it's the market or from, you know, some other force somewhere else that you need to orient towards. If you start off with that preliminary level of understanding as to who is responsible for what and under what remit and how that is going to relate to the things that other people are involved in, you can very, very easily avoid that sort of situation whereby you have people who are basically kind of entire principles into themselves. In some cases, if you're doing something very experimental, it can be useful to, and there are examples of where this management approach has been used for that, where you can actually get people to kind of originate their own goals and things like that. And that might be useful in some contexts, especially research contexts, but it doesn't have to be along those lines. It can be very, very straightforward to say to people, well, this is the component that we need you to build. This is what you're going to be tasked with doing. And there can be a lot of give and take at that stage as well, in terms of them coming to the person who's going to be managing them and saying, well, if you want me to do this, I need you to enable me in this way. I need you to either tell me how to do this, or I need X amount of additional funds in order to make this thing happen. Or, you know, and then have the conversation whether the funds are necessary, or can you do something clever to do it without the funds, and so on and so forth. So if you have that dialogue earlier on, and you have that real commitment to understanding with clarity what you intend to do, including the extent to which, if there needs to be flexibility in that, or if you expect certain scope items to change, you can avoid that. And especially if you can combine it with the kinds of organizational dynamics where people don't have all of their own kinds of, it's the thing that I mentioned earlier with Apple, as contrast, for instance, to a company like Sony, where Sony had, and I think still has, each department has its own profit and loss statement. And as a result of that, they tend to compete with each other because there's a finite pool of resources and each one wants to optimize its own sort of garden and its own area of interest and influence. And if you can unite people along the lines that, you know, everyone has equivalent stake in the success of this, and there's going to be some incentive that aligns that, then you can avoid a lot of those things. But yeah, it can happen if you don't vote against it, for sure. Does that make sense?
Yep, does. Thank you.
Very good. Okay, Marvin.
Oh, thanks. Quickly, let me quickly jump in. We only have a few minutes left. This discussion is very interesting, and I'll kind of jump in with the question I had because it aligns directly with Marvin's.
Okay.
What I still have was, I mean, we're talking about hyper-performance management in a general sense, but how can you make it specific to the age? And that's exactly what Marvin's asking. Marvin, do you want to unmute? Or should we just read the question?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so let me quickly read it. So what metrics are used to assess the success of digital humanities projects beyond publication, especially in terms of societal impact or community involvement? How are indigenous knowledge systems protected from exploitation while being digitized or published under digital humanities initiatives? How do you ensure your high-performance project management tools consider community-centered and inclusive digital methodologies?
Yeah, so I think that, again, the beauty of this system is the fact that it clears a lot of the kinds of, a lot of the conventions that can otherwise be, I suppose, a barrier to some of these things out of the way, and allows for you to establish more or less exactly the priorities that you aim to with these, with any of the initiatives that you might be minded to apply an HPM approach to. I mean, I guess that kind of is in and of itself the full answer. You whatever your actual kind of specific priority set in terms of using this, whether it's for the sorts of things that you mentioned, or you're trying to engineer very specific kinds of productivity increases, or you have a team that's really, really talented but really miserable, and you're just trying to stop them from leaving your organization, or whatever the case may be. The entire thing is designed really to function as a sort of motor towards a generalized, and for that matter, a kind of context-specific goal. So to whatever extent you wished to purpose this for community-centered initiatives, I mean, it would work as well for that as it would if you were trying to, I don't know, organize an air force or something like that. It's entirely based on organizational dynamics and how to get the most out of the people that you're working with, from both a personal fulfillment level and a productivity level. So I think it should fit in with those kinds of priorities just as well as it would any others. Does that make sense?
Wonderful. No, I think at least it makes sense to me. I hope that it makes sense to
Marvin,
Marvin as well. He's on the road, so I'm not sure if he can easily answer.
Okay.
So I think we're kind of running out of time. It's 11 o'clock in South Africa, at least. No, well, thank you so much for this presentation, Maxi. This is very, very interesting. And I've seen something like this which you presented before, and I was really impressed at the time. It was so nice to have enough. Well, it's not really enough time because it's never enough time, but a lot of time for discussion, because then you can kind of dive in the actual kind of interesting or relevant to people's questions. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your presentation, but I think we'll need to stop here.
No problem. Thank you for having me, and thank you for all the fabulous questions. As I say, it was really a pleasure to answer them. And yes, I will coordinate with Menno, and we will make some plans, and hopefully get something spun up very, very shortly, and get everybody who wants to be on it. It'll be great. It'll be fun.
No, that'll be wonderful. I would definitely open for sharing this. There seems to be quite an interest in this anyway, so I think that'll be great.
Great.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody. I'll see many of you very soon, hopefully.
Hopefully, yeah. Thanks.
Bye, everybody.